Imagine living in a quiet village, and suddenly, the smell of death starts seeping from one of the houses. Police break in, only to find plastic bags filled with skulls and the dismembered remains of children. But here's the real mystery. After 17 years of investigations, the alleged killers walked out of prison free. So, what really happened inside that house of horrors? Stay tuned to uncover the full story. And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling true crime cases. In a seemingly quiet Indian village, a crime shook hearts before it shook the headlines. It was not just an isolated incident, but a series of horrifying acts that few perpetrators could ever escape justice for. Yet this time, the accused held vast influence, enabling them to turn the course of the investigation upside down, as if the law itself dared not approach them. The story began in December 2006, when police discovered human remains and skeletons in a place no one would expect, inside a sewage drain located behind a lavish residence known as House D5 in Nithari village. What made the scene even more disturbing was that most of the victims were children. The village itself was strangely divided. One part sunk deep into poverty, and another, just a single street away, filled with mansions and luxury cars. House D5 stood at the heart of the wealthy area, yet its reputation among locals was in ruins. People spoke of never-ending wild parties and frequent visits from prominent figures, including doctors, officials, and even high-ranking police officers. Inside that house lived two men, Moninder Singh Pandher, a wealthy 52-year-old businessman, and his associate Surinder Koli, a man in his mid-30s. After the remains were found behind the house, police quickly arrested them, then launched an extensive search of the property. What they found turned the case into a national nightmare: more human remains, along with small clothes and shoes clearly belonging to children. But the story did not begin there. A year earlier, in early 2005, reports of missing children began to mount in the poor section of the village. The scenes were heartbreaking. A child would leave to play or to buy a few household items and never return. At a chilling rate, 1 or 2 children vanished every 2 weeks. The families, consumed by grief and fear, turned to the police. But the responses were shocking: mockery, neglect, and claims that the children had abandoned their families to escape poverty. Being impoverished, the villagers' pleas went unheard until they pushed as hard as they could, and the news finally reached the media. Only then did the case begin to unravel into a public scandal that could no longer be hidden. As time went on, a strange smell began to spread across the village. Its source traced back to the sewage drain behind House D5, a place long shrouded in suspicion. It felt like a sign that could no longer be ignored. Under mounting pressure from the media, the police finally decided to show some activity. They opened investigation files and began gathering statements from the families of the missing children. It didn't take long for them to realize that almost every disappearance had occurred along the road dividing the poor neighborhood from the affluent Sector 31. It was an isolated path, no cameras, minimal traffic, so much so that locals called it the Black Hole, for the many lives it had swallowed without leaving a trace. One day, while some children were playing near the sewage drain, they came across a plastic bag that caught their curiosity. When they opened it, they found what appeared to be decomposing human remains. Horrified, they ran to their parents, who in turn reported it to the police. But the complaint was met with the same cold indifference as always, as if nothing had happened. Months passed, and the disappearances continued. Then, in May 2006, a 22-year-old young woman named Payal vanished. Before leaving her home, she told her father she was going to House D5. It didn't strike him as odd. She had professional dealings with the residents there. But this time, Payal never came back. Her father searched for her tirelessly, then went to the homeowner, Moninder, to ask about her. Moninder denied knowing her at all, claiming she had never set foot in his house. Her father's suspicion deepened. He knew her history with that place. He went to the police, only to be ignored like all the other villagers. But unlike most, Payal's father was not powerless. He wasn't wealthy, but he had influence and connections that could not be dismissed. Through relentless pressure, he forced the police to open the first official investigation into a disappearance in the village. During questioning, they discovered that on the day Payal went missing, Moninder had been attending his father's funeral, seemingly clearing him of suspicion, at least temporarily. Still, he admitted to knowing her, claiming he had paid her for occasional visits, but insisted they had not met that day. When phone records were checked, they revealed that the last person to contact her was a man named Surinder Koli, a servant in Moninder's household. When questioned, Koli broke quickly. He confessed to luring Payal into the house, assaulting her, and then killing her. But with that confession, it became clear. This was only the surface of something far darker than anyone had imagined. At first, no one realized how deep the horror went. But when the police began digging in the backyard of House D5, the earth started giving up its secrets. One after another, skeletal remains emerged. Small bones, skulls with faded strands of hair, pieces of clothing buried with the dead. It was a graveyard disguised as a backyard. The villagers gathered in shock, unable to comprehend how so many lives had been stolen right under their noses. Parents recognized shreds of clothing that once belonged to their children. The air was thick with cries, curses, and the crushing weight of grief. In the days that followed, forensic teams worked tirelessly, unearthing more and more evidence. Each find was worse than the last. Human skulls were stacked in sacks. Jewelry, toys, and shoes were found scattered among the remains. Silent witnesses to the brutality that had unfolded in that house. When interrogated again, Koli revealed chilling details. He claimed that, over the years, he had lured dozens of victims into the house, most of them children. He described, without remorse, how he assaulted and murdered them. But the most horrifying revelation was his admission that he had eaten parts of their bodies. The confession shook the entire nation. News channels aired every gruesome detail, and the story became known as one of the most horrifying serial murder cases in the country's history. Moninder, the wealthy homeowner, insisted he knew nothing, that Koli acted alone. But suspicions persisted. Many wondered, how could such horrors take place in his home without him ever knowing? In the end, both men were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, abduction, and destruction of evidence. The trial was long, the details unbearable. Families of the victims demanded the death penalty, calling it the only justice for the innocent lives lost. House D5 was eventually abandoned, but its walls had already absorbed the screams of the forgotten. To this day, locals say the place is cursed, a silent monument to the darkness that once lived there. And for the families left behind, the pain never ended. Because while the killers were caught, the question that haunted them remained. How many more children could still be buried in the shadows of that cursed house? The man known as Big Boss enjoyed a good reputation among those around him, especially given the strong bond he shared with his close aide, Surinder. Their relationship went far beyond ordinary trust. Big Boss would hand over his money and possessions without hesitation, relying on Surinder in every aspect of his life. For his part, Surinder was devoted to him, willing to take full responsibility, even if it meant sacrificing himself. But events took a darker turn when the father of one of the victims broke his silence, revealing that he had overheard a conversation between Big Boss and a police officer, in which Big Boss admitted to being fully involved with Surinder, in what had happened. The father claimed he heard him describe chilling details about how the victims were disposed of and about disturbing acts committed after their deaths, before the bodies were hidden in deceptive ways. It didn't stop there. The father also said that the officer was writing everything down in a small notebook he kept. Somehow, this notebook ended up in the father's hands. He photographed it and kept a copy. Not long after, the father was found dead in his home, showing signs of violence. The police had visited his home several times before his death, raising suspicions about the mysterious circumstances of his passing. The real shock came when his wife, the victim's mother, appeared carrying the photographed copy of the notebook. She handed it over to officers of higher rank than the one who had recorded the confessions. After verifying the handwriting, they confirmed it was indeed that officer's handwriting, making the father's claims undeniable. The course of the case changed dramatically. Charges were brought not only against Surinder, but also against Big Boss himself, including murder, assault, and running a criminal network. In the end, both men were sentenced to death by hanging. But the story didn't end there. Surinder filed an appeal, claiming that his previous confessions had been coerced and that he was not the real perpetrator. Thus, the case became one of the most controversial crime files in the country, a case tangled in betrayal, corruption, and dark secrets, where it was almost impossible to tell the guilty from the innocent. Surinder later admitted in a subsequent hearing that everything that happened had not been his own doing, but rather the work of Moninder, his influential employer. He said he had merely been a tool to lure the victims, acting on Moninder's orders, and that everything that followed was solely Moninder's doing. When Surinder was asked, "Why did you say you were the one who did it all?" he replied that it had been under immense pressure and direct threats, and that the police wanted to pin the full blame on him. As a result, the court dropped 6 out of 19 charges against him, but 13 remained, for which he was sentenced to death. As for Moninder, he was transferred the charges that had been dropped from Surinder, but the court only convicted him on 3 of them, and he too was sentenced to death. Yet, neither of them gave up. They kept filing appeal after appeal, hiring the most powerful lawyers in the country, until the case began to seem like an endless legal battle. On October 16, 2023, the court announced that this chain of appeals had finally ended, and that there was no room for further petitions. But the biggest shock was that the court acquitted both men of all charges, citing insufficient evidence. They walked free, as if nothing had ever happened. Perhaps, as was claimed, their initial confessions had been extracted under duress. But one question still hung in the air. What about the clothes, the skeletal remains, and the belongings found in Moninder's house? How could their disappearance from the case file be explained? The answer lay in an event that occurred in 2014, when a massive fire broke out at Moninder's house, destroying everything inside, documents and evidence alike. Many believed it was arson, happening shortly after the case details had emerged, as if the goal was to erase every trace. Today, some newspapers and articles speak of the 2 men merely as suspects, as if the pages of the past have been turned. Yet the words of the father of one of the victims, a girl who was barely 7 years old, still echo. Perhaps the court acquitted them, but there is a divine court far more just, and it will never spare them. And so, the story is closed, but it leaves behind heavy shadows and secrets still left untold.